The first thing he noticed was the sound. It wasn't loud enough to be obvious, not at first. Just a low, irregular grind that didn't belong to water or wind or birds. He heard it through the open window while making coffee, a faint mechanical insistence that sat wrong against the lake's usual morning rhythm. He didn't rush. He finished what he was doing, rinsed the mug, and stood still long enough to be certain he wasn't imagining it. He wasn't. By the time he stepped outside, the sound had resolved into voices and machinery, carried faintly over the water. He walked down toward the shoreline, boots sinking slightly into the damp soil, and stopped when he saw the excavator arm moving where nothing mechanical had ever moved before. It was on his side of the waterline. Not by much, but enough. He stood there quietly for a long moment, hands in his pockets, watching men in reflective vests gesture at each other, watching concrete forms being set where cattails used to grow. They worked with the confidence of people who had already decided the matter was settled. That confidence interested him more than the machines. He did not shout. He did not wave. He took out his phone, checked the time, and began recording. He had chosen this life precisely because it did not require constant reaction. The cabin, the water, the measured isolation, all of it had been a way to let the world exhaust itself somewhere else. He had learned long ago that most problems burned themselves out if you didn't feed them noise. But he had also learned something else, something deeper and harder. Systems did not correct themselves. They only stopped when they met something they could not move. He walked the perimeter slowly, noting tire tracks, the angle of the slope, the way the soil had already begun to slump where it had been compacted. He knew that shoreline. He knew how water behaved there during spring runoff, how it crept sideways before it surged, how roots held more than soil. None of the men working did. That was obvious in the way they treated the land like a surface instead of a system. When one of them finally noticed him, the man lifted a hand in a vague greeting, the universal gesture of someone who assumed there was no problem worth addressing. The narrator nodded once in return, neither friendly nor hostile, and walked back up toward the cabin. Inside, he pulled a thin binder from a shelf. It was old, the edges soft from use, the contents arranged with the quiet order of someone who trusted paper more than memory. Survey plats. Deeds. Notes written in pencil decades earlier. He flipped to the page he wanted and confirmed what he already knew. The boundary did not end where the HOA thought it did. It ended precisely where the excavator now sat. He did not call anyone that day. The notice for the Homeowners Association meeting arrived 2 days later, slid under his door as if the land itself had delivered it. He read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table beside his instruments. When the night came, he reviewed aerial imagery from before the construction began, overlaid it with current satellite data, and marked the changes in red. He saved copies in 3 places. Habit. The gym smelled like floor polish and old sweat. Folding chairs filled the space, rows of them occupied by people who looked faintly annoyed at having been asked to show up at all. He took a seat near the back, not because he was hiding, but because vantage mattered. From there he could see faces, hands, posture. He could tell who was bored, who was eager, who would follow the loudest voice in the room without question. Kendall Pryor stood near the front, clipboard in hand, posture rigid with the confidence of someone who had never been meaningfully contradicted. She spoke well, he would give her that. Clear voice. Efficient cadence. She talked about drainage issues, about standing water, about improving the shoreline for everyone. The words were familiar. He had heard versions of them his entire career. Improvement was often what people called change when they didn't understand consequence. When it was time for public comment, he stood. He did not introduce himself with flourish. He gave his name, his address, and stated calmly that the work being done extended onto his property, buried legal survey monuments, altered a floodplain, and violated multiple environmental statutes. He offered to provide documentation. Kendall smiled the way people do when they are certain they are about to win something. She thanked him for his concern and assured him that everything had been reviewed. She suggested that his information might be outdated. There was laughter, not cruel but dismissive. Comfortable laughter. The kind that comes from knowing you are part of the majority. He nodded once and sat down. Dave, seated 2 rows ahead of him, glanced back briefly. Dave had the look of a man who wanted to be reasonable but did not want to be alone. He would vote with the room. The narrator already knew that. The motion passed. Concrete would be poured the next morning. That night, he worked. He retrieved original survey records from county archives, some digitized poorly, others scanned from linen so old the ink had bled. He cross-referenced them with modern coordinates, adjusted for datum shifts, and re-established the original boundary mathematically before he ever stepped outside. When he did, he brought professional-grade equipment with him, not the sort of thing hobbyists owned. He located the damaged monument by feel before sight, brushing away disturbed soil, uncovering the edge of iron where it had been bent and buried. He photographed it from multiple angles, measured displacement, recorded depth. Each image carried metadata precise enough to withstand scrutiny.
He didn't rush.
Accuracy required patience.
The concrete came.
It went in fast, smooth, irreversible looking. He let it cure. People assumed he had given up. Kendall certainly did. She waved at him once as she passed his drive, triumphant in the way small victories inflate people who have never had to defend them. He watched her go without expression. The letters began arriving 2 weeks later.
First from the county.
Then from the state environmental office. Then from an agency most of the HOA had never heard of but should have. Each letter was polite, formal, and heavy with implication. Each one cited specific violations, statutes, and penalties. Each one referenced documentation he had provided. The meeting this time was smaller.
Quieter. Kendall spoke less.
When the maps were projected onto the wall, the room changed. There is something about data when it is presented cleanly, without commentary, that silences argument. The red line on the screen did not care how many people had voted. It did not care who had laughed. It existed. The officials explained the consequences without drama. Construction halted immediately. The concrete would be removed. The land would be restored. Costs would be borne entirely by the HOA. Individual liability was discussed, not as a threat, but as a fact. Kendall's authority collapsed in real time.
Not explosively. Just drained.
She sat down slowly, hands folded, as if posture alone could preserve control.
It couldn't.
Afterward, Dave approached him in the parking lot. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders drawn inward.
We didn't know, Dave said.
You didn't ask, the narrator replied, not unkindly.
Dave nodded.
There might be other things. Drainage.
Permits. Then don't guess, he said.
Hire someone who knows. Read what you're voting on. Dave exhaled. It's expensive. Truth usually is. The restoration took longer than the destruction.
It always did.
He refused shortcuts, rejected cheap soil, insisted on correct compaction profiles and native mixes.
He stood on site, boots muddy, watching each stage.
When something wasn't right, he said so calmly, and waited until it was fixed.
He planted by hand.
Dogwood first, then sedges, then grasses that would bend without breaking when the water rose. He measured depth, spacing, orientation. His back ached at night, and he welcomed it. Pain that came from repair felt different. One afternoon, he saw Kendall loading boxes into a rented truck. They made eye contact across the restored shoreline. She looked at the plants, at the soil, at him. There was no anger there. Just the hollow confusion of someone who had mistaken volume for substance. She left without a word. When it was done, truly done, he installed the new monument. Not a temporary marker, but a permanent one, aligned and stamped, set to outlast all of them.
He checked the coordinates twice. Then a third time.
Birds returned quickly. A great blue heron stood near the water, unmoved by his presence.
He watched it hunt, patient, precise.
That evening, he cleaned his boots, updated his records, and closed the file. The land was quiet again.
Not empty. Balanced.
He sat on the porch as the light faded, listening to grass move in the wind, knowing exactly where he stood.